Then his seamen asked him what he would do. "I will bear to Greenland and pass the winter with my father, if you will give me your company." All said that they would follow in his counsel. Then Bjarn said, "Imprudent will appear our voyage, since none of us have been in the Greenland Ocean." However, they soon put to sea, and they were ready and sailed for 3 days until the land was out of sight under the water. But then the fair wind fell, and there arose north winds and fogs, and they knew not where they were. And thus it continued for many days. After that they saw the sun again and could discover the sky, and they made sail and sailed for that day before they saw land. And they asked Bjarn if this was Greenland. But Bjarn said that it could not be. They asked whether he wished to sail to this land or not. He said, "My advice is to sail close to the land." And so they did, and soon saw the land was without mountains, covered in wood, and had very small heights. They left the land on their larboard side and let the stern turn from the land. Afterwards they sailed 2 days before they saw another land that was flat and covered in wood. They asked Bjarn if he thought this was Greenland. But he said that he did not believe that this was Greenland, little as much as the other, because in Greenland it is said that they have very high hills. So they turned to the prow from the land, and sailing from the open sea for another 3 days with a southwest wind, they saw a third land, and this land was high and covered with mountains and ice hills. They asked whether Bjarn would land there, and he said, "No, this appears very little inviting." Therefore they did not lower sail, but held along this land, and saw that it was in fact an island. Again they turned stern from the land and sailed out to the sea with the same fair wind, and the breeze freshened, and Bjarn told them to shorten sail, and not sail faster than their ship and ship's gear could hold out. They sailed now for 4 days, when they saw the fourth land. They asked Bjarn whether he thought this was Greenland. Bjarn answered, "This is most like the Greenland that I have been told about, and it was here we shall steer for land." And so did they, and landed in the evening under a ness, and there was a boat by the ness, and just here lived Bjarn's father. A rather haphazard way of finding your way home. So good afternoon, as I hope all sort of rested here. As Daisy said, yeah, I started reenacting in 2009. Like most reenactors, I started off as a Viking, and now I also do 13th century Wars of the Roses. For later periods, I do specialise in medicine and surgery. I did actually offer Leah today for me to talk about some home remedies from the Viking Age, but she seemed to like the idea of me breaking out the box a little bit and talking about finding your way home. For my... Oops. Is it on? Ah, there we go. For my Viking era display, I wanted to put together a trader with examples of sort of goods I might be picking up on my travels, what I was likely to have in my cargo hold. This was taken at the Battle of Stamford Bridge event last year. So I had samples of wools and silks and furs and amber and jet, but I also started looking about how these traders would have been getting about. I would like to emphasise that my interest in this topic is from an archaeological and social history perspective. I'm not a scientist or a skilled maritime navigator, although I do have a GCSE in nautical studies. Very long story. I'm probably also going to butcher some pronunciations again today, so like Leah, I beg your forgiveness. Shall I just point there? The Norse trade routes famously stretched from the Mediterranean to the Baltic, to Greenland and everything in between, not to mention evidence of temporary settlements in what is now the east coast of Canada, possibly one of the yarns that Bjorn happened to stumble across on his way to Greenland, which rather goes against this popular perception of the Vikings' superior navigation skills, which has reached such mythic proportions that last year somebody sent me this as a birthday card. Damn you! But I think it would be safe to say that an important factor for those traders was local knowledge. It's very telling that right before he gets lost, Bjarn admits that none of us have been in the Greenland Ocean before. He's going on by how other people have told him he's going to be looking at these descriptions. Now, experienced mariners would have combined knowledge of winds, tides, coastal features, and sensible times, all committed to memory to find their way. And as mariners moved around, they would meet new people and continue to gather local knowledge. A wonderful example of this comes from the 9th century translation of Paulus Oroyus' 5th century History of the World. This is going to get a little bit Indiana Jones from here on in. So the translator, often said to be King Alfred himself, is actually probably one of the people in his court, inserted an introduction into this translation which recounts the adventures of two travellers, Ottar and Wulfstan. They were probably transcribed directly from the verbal accounts of the travellers themselves when they visited Alfred's court. In one section, quote, Wulfstan said that he went from Hedeby to Trousseau in 7 days and nights, and that the ship was running under sail all the way. He then goes on to describe the route that he took, with a short commentary of the peoples and places that he passed on his way. It is noticeable that both Hedeby and Trousseau were major trading ports at that time. Hedeby sits at the end of a narrow inlet and is 9 miles west to the Trine River, which would then connect you to the North Sea. Trousseau, in modern-day Poland, sits at the end of the Vistula River, referred to by Wulfstan as the VALHAll, by which vessels can travel about 650 miles into mainland Europe. The journey between these two ports, as described by Wulfstan, would be approximately 395 nautical miles. Covering this over 7 days and nights, he was travelling at an average speed of 2.35 knots. The prospect of travelling through the night is apparently not something which fazed Norse mariners, although when close to land, a major consideration would have been keeping a safe distance from the shoreline to avoid running aground. Thank you very much. Again, from the Bio Tapestry, if we look just to the left of the chap with the anchor, the one stood at the front of the boat, you can see this character is holding a line into the sea. Now, this has been interpreted as a sounding lead, which should have been lowered into the water to determine the depth. The line was marked at regular intervals in order to easily measure the length, and the end was marked with a weight, usually made of lead. A few examples of sounding leads. These have been used since antiquity. The example on the top left was dredged from the east coast of Britain, came from Aggregates area. The others are from shipwrecks in the eastern Mediterranean, close to the coast of Israel, with various typologies dating from the 1st to the 7th century AD. When journeying out into the open ocean, we will turn to a set of instructions from a 14th century version of the Landnamabok. From Hernet in Norway, one should keep sailing west to reach VALHAll in Greenland, and then you are sailing north of Shetland, so that this can only be seen if visibility is very good. But south of Faroes, that you'll see that the sea looks halfway up the mountainside. Then south of Iceland, so that one only becomes aware of the birds and whales from it. Now, there's a lot to unpick from this. The distance between these 2 points is approximately 1,430 nautical miles. A flight between the nearest airports today, which would be Bergen and Eoforwic, would be 10 hours and 45 minutes. Apparently, the cheapest ticket goes at £1,800. A longship travelling in favourable conditions, we're going to give a generous speed of average 10 knots, would take approximately 6 days. However, if we are less generous and take Wulfstan's average speed from Hedeby to Trousseau as a guide, the voyage would take 25 days in the open ocean. This, of course, could be broken up with stops at Shetland, the Faroe Islands and Iceland. The force and the direction of the wind could give an estimate as to the speed and thus the distance travelled given in a different day. Weather permitting, a voyage from Denmark to the coast of Britain would take about a day and a half. It would seem to me that on longer voyages, short hops would be preferable and certainly safer. Yet this account implies that doing the entire voyage in one go was certainly an option. The instructions also tell us a great deal about their understanding of geography and how this knowledge would be passed from one mariner to another. When passing the Faroes, the sea will look halfway up the mountainside, so they understood how distant objects will dip below the horizon. You're looking for coastal landmarks, distinctive features which allow you to place your position, and the names of these features still carry Norse roots today. So here in Yorkshire, the mouth of the Humber estuary is Spurn Point. The Old Norse name for this feature is Ravenspurn, the raven's tongue, and there was actually a series of later medieval settlements along this feature which have now been lost to erosion. Now, looking at this account, when passing south of Iceland, the account says that you won't see it, but you'll become aware of birds and whales, which indicate proximity to land. Seabirds will, of course, only journey so far from their nests before turning back. When it comes to the feeding of whales, major land masses create rich feeding grounds for whales as the nutrients from the deep level of the sea are brought up to the surface. And these are not only the only indicators of when land is nearby when you're sailing through the open ocean. Cloud formations, wave patterns, watercolour, that the sea is browner the closer you are to land. The account says to keep sailing west, so they had an understanding of latitude and longitude. Of course, maintaining a perfect longitude over such distances would be nearly impossible. The likely method would be to aim for a particular landmass and then fine-tune when you're in close sight of land. The sun's course through the sky would serve to establish east and west during the day, and in fact an early 12th century Icelandic farmer, Oddi Helgason, observed the movements of the sun and was able to accurately calculate the dates for the summer and winter solstices from his observations, very accurately so. And of course, when travelling through the night, Ursa Major and Minor, often known as the Big and Little Dipper. Now, the Old Norse name for Ursa Major is Kalvan, the man's chariot. Some have even suggested that you could refer to it as Thor's chariot. And then Ursa Minor, Kevavang, the woman's, potentially Freya's chariot. And of course, at the top of the woman's chariot is the Polaris, the North Star, often referred to as Ledestjärna, the guiding star. Now, when it comes to determining latitude and finding true north, this is where we come to some of the slightly more controversial aspects of this talk. The Unatok disk, which was found in the southern part of Greenland in 1948 by Danish archaeologist Christian Webeck, who was excavating a ruined church near Eoforwic, which was interpreted as a 14th century Benedictine convent. The disc is made of larch or spruce with a diameter of 7 centimetres. It's about 1 centimetre thick and a central hole of 1.5 centimetres. Across its surface are various carved lines, a series of triangular notches. Carbon-14 dating gave a date of roughly 1000 AD, although given the 14th century context of the site, this has been subsequently challenged. It was estimated that the complete circle would have approximately 32 notches. A Danish marine officer and naval historian, Captain Carl Solver, pointed out that this is the same as a contemporary maritime compass. Thus, the disc was interpreted as a navigation device and caught popular imagination. Feel free to boo and hiss. This is the disc as it appears in History Channel's Vikings TV series. This is the simplest interpretation, that of a sunboard. And I do have a larger replica here that I made a couple of years ago. The idea, as presented here by Ragnar Lothbrok, is that you would place the disc in water at midday so that it sits flat. The sun casts a shadow from the central pin, and you mark the length of the shadow on the board. Tomorrow, at the same time of day, you'll bring it out, you'll do it again, and if the shadow is in exactly the same place, it means you're travelling exactly east-west, whereas if it's shorter or longer, it means that you're drifting north or south. That's the simple version. However, examination of the lines on the original have suggested something a little bit more sophisticated. One straight line corresponded to the spring and autumn equinox, when the curved line is matched to the summer solstice at 61 degrees north, which is southern Greenland. This suggests a true sun compass, which takes into account the height of the sun at noon, depending on your latitude and time of year. And this is the more sophisticated version that I've put together, which you can see how I've brought out at numbers. So this is a truly accurate sun compass. It would take you a year to manufacture, tracing the movements of the sun through the seasons. Again, at midday, and you build this on land, you point the compass to north, make a note of the shadow. When completed, you could bring this out at midday at any point on that latitude, as the curved line is taking account into the height of the sun at noon, depending on the time of year. You would turn the disc until the tip of the shadow touches the line, and at that point, the horizontal arrow is pointing north. Now, as I say, this replica was knocked up in an afternoon, although when I tested it with a modern compass, it was only 5 degrees out. Now, admittedly, on a voyage from Norway to Greenland, I'd probably miss Greenland entirely. But as a first attempt, I'll take that. Now, since the discovery of the Unatak disc, there have been several attempts to test its effectiveness. The first was on board the Saga Sigler, a 57-foot replica Nar that was built in Norway in 1984 and captained by former journalist Ragnar Forseth. What a name. In 1991, on a crossing from Reykjavik to Greenland, Ragnar used a reproduction made in the Maritime Museum at Kronborg, Denmark, and it was said that in good sun, it was said to work perfectly. More recently, a 52-foot nard built in the year 2000 at the Viking Ship Museum, also in Denmark, used a replica of this disc to navigate from Denmark to Scotland. Since the discovery of the Unitac disc, there's also been a number of similar finds that have been found in Central Europe. In the year 2000, a wooden disc was found in Wolin, northern Poland. Made from oak, it was measured at 1.1 to 8.6 centimetres across, with a central hole of 1 centimetre, comparative size. Dendrochronology has dated it to the first half of the 11th century, although like the Unitoc disc, its stratigraphic context has been called into question. Also like the Unitoc disc, its markings correspond with movements of the sun. The straight line on one side of the disc marks the equinox, while the curved line on the opposite side denoted the end of April or midsummer at 60 degrees north. A year later, 2001, a fragment of a bone disc was found in Trousseau, Poland, notably the very port where Woolston describes his destination from Hedeby. The complete artifact was estimated to be 10 centimetres in diameter. Stratigraphic context indicates the turn of the 10th century, and like the Unitac and Wolin discs, the Trousseau disc has lines which correspond to the summer solstice, but this time at 54 degrees north. And then finally, we have the ones that have been called a little bit into question. This has really come out of a few papers that have been written in the last couple of years. A set of 9 pyrophyllite stones that were found from various sites across the Ukraine, all dating from the 10th to the 13th century. In the centre and on the left, we have 2 which came from Malje Listven in 1986, and on the right, a fragment from one which came from Leah in 2010. Now, while these discs are of a similar size to the previous ones we discovered, the one on the left having a comparative diameter of 6.5 centimetres, again 1.7 centimetre hole, what this does not have are the gnomic lines indicating the movements of the sun. Instead, what we have is a series of rings which are much, much closer to the central sunboard. The final instrument that I would like to look at, which is often very closely associated with the sun compasses, and this is the sunstone, again, modelled by our trusty Ragnar Lothbrok. Now, there are 2 literary sources that potentially give credence to the theory of the sunstone. The first comes from the Landsnammerbok in relation to the discovery of Greenland, that there was a man named Floki Vilgarðarson. He was a great Viking. He sacrificed 3 ravens who were to show him the way, because at that time seafarers had no guiding stones in the Northlands. Floki settled from there to the Faroes, and from there he settled out to sea with 3 ravens that he sacrificed in Norway. And when he let the first one go, it flew back over the bow. Another flew up into the air and back to the ship, but the third one flew over the bow in the direction in which they found the land. Now, the use of the ravens is an obvious reworking of the doves sent from Noah's Ark. However, the use of the term guiding stones could potentially refer to a sunstone. Another Icelandic saga, Rudolfsdatter, is a little more clear. The weather was thick and snowy, as Sigurður has predicted. Then the king summoned Sigurður and Durga to him. The king made people look out, and they could see nowhere a clear sky. Then he asked Sigurður to tell him where the sun was at this time. He gave a clear assertion. Then the king made them fetch a solar stone and held it up, and saw light where they radiated from the stone, and thus directly verified Sigurður's prediction. The interpretation is that the sunstone was a piece of optical calcite, also known as Iceland spar, that when held up to an overcast sky would polarize the light and make the sun's position visible. Now, in 2013, a shipwreck was discovered off the coast of Alderney in the English Channel. Sunk in 1592, it was found on board a piece of Iceland spar next to a set of dividers. Thus it was interpreted as the famous navigational device. Now, many people will tell you, and the History Channel series makes this mistake as well, that the sunstone completely cancels out the cloud cover and allows the sun's light to reach the sunboard. Basically, you will have them doing this sort of business to try and get a reading. That is not how it works at all. It does not cast a beam. It is not to be used with a sun compass. It is a completely separate tool. all it actually does is help you find the location of the sun in the sky. Now, where this is useful, like the movements of the stars, if you think about the physics of what's happening, it's where Oddy Helgeson's observations of the sun are important. If you know the speed at which the sun moves across the sky, which is about 15 degrees each hour, you can see the moving position of the sun as a fixed reference point. I'm going this way, the sun is doing this across me. It's also very useful if you are sailing in northern Scandinavia in the summer, because the sun will set because it doesn't get dark, there's no stars. The sun will give a wide orange glow just below the horizon, and this stone would allow you to find the sun's position within that glow. So what are we to make from all of these finds? They've been proven to work, but that doesn't mean that their original purpose was for navigation. I am going to address the elephant in the room that not all of the evidence we've looked at is from the Viking period. The textual sources were pretty much all written down in the later medieval period, so we've got to take that into account, that designs are shifting, there's a bit of bias going on. A recurring themes in the sagas is that new lands such as Iceland, Greenland, Vinland, they're discovered by accident after being driven off course by a storm and or then being in fog. So where was the sun compass and the sunstone then? There is no mention of the sun compasses in any of the sagas. The physical finds, as I said, the Alderney sunstone dates from 1592. Of the supposed sun compasses, the only one with an unchallenged Viking era date is the bone fragment from Trousseau, which was dated to the early 10th century. The Volin and Untak discs, while initially dated to the early 11th century, have both since been challenged. Much later dates have been suggested due to the stratigraphy they were found in. So could it be that all we're actually doing here is trying to retroactively apply them to the Viking Age? A great many very respected academics over the years have rejected the interpretation of the Untak disc as a navigational tool altogether, just called it a flight of fancy. In 1997, Richard Hall suggested that the Untak disc may be a piece of, quote, ecclesiastical computational equipment, citing confession discs, which are known to be used in Iceland and used by parish priests to count the number of people taking confession. Remember that the disc was found in the remnants of a Benedictine convent. Other interpretations is that it was a butter stamp, the top for a small keg, a component of a fish trap or even a spindle wall. The Wallin disc has been interpreted as a fishing float or a potter's bat, and the stone discs from Ukraine have been interpreted potentially as polishing stones or even the flywheel for a bow drill. So what do you think? I will say, whatever their material, it has to be noted that these objects are of a similar size with quite comparable patterns. So the possibility that their uses are related but not be readily dismissed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. Right then, we've got time for a couple of questions. If anyone would like to ask anything. Seems like you've really covered it.
I'll just add one.
Is it a question?
It's an observation. If that is a flywheel from a bow drill, it ought to probably have a square centre hole. Otherwise, as you rotate it, it will be encouraged with a round hole just to keep spinning. So I'd probably put that in.
Agreed, yeah.
Any questions?
Leah, I think Leah's got one.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I was listening, I couldn't hear from the kitchen very well. What material was the disc made of? Sorry, the last one.
So all three of the ones on the bottom are stone. It's pyrophallite. So it's very similar to shale. So it's because they're quite a different material. It's not the sort of thing that you'd necessarily want to use at sea, for instance, because you can imagine it's going to be quite a delicate piece compared to a wooden or a bone one.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
So you also said that they would float them in water, so surely the stone didn't work for that.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of questions. I mean, the whole idea of this one was that the idea is you put it in a bucket of water because that way you got a perfectly level reading. But
I think Sasha, did you have a question?
No, I was going to ask about if the stones were buoyant.
Oh, okay, here we are.
no.
John at the back.
Thank you. I think the sun compass has lots of different uses, and I can understand that that could be a Viking navigational aid. The sunstone, I can never figure out how it works.
There's a couple of different versions of how people. I'll be honest, I've never made this thing work. I've never.
Turning it off and on again.
So some people said that you can just hold it up to cloud cover and you can see sort of the slight glow coming through. Another version which I've seen is what you can do is what you do is make a dot. I mean, a lot of people when they've done this, they've done with a permanent marker. But what they do is if you sort of turn it very gradually, what will start to happen is that the dot will sort of start to converge a little bit, and so you'll get a glow just around that dot. It's probably a similar effect to looking at this eclipse.
Would the Vikings have used Sharpie also?
A daub of charcoal, perhaps. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, would you like to ask something?
Yeah, I was just wondering about the 32 notches around that first piece. I mean, if all you're doing is measuring whether the stick's long or short.
It doesn't do anything. Yeah, I mean, unless there was another secondary use that came out of that. I mean, it is possible. I mean, I suppose if you're using the sun compass, in the more advanced form, because this will actually find north. Once you've found north, you can be using those to start making a reading, just as you would do with a modern compass.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.